Hey everybody, Adam with Reverb.com here. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite gear subjects, vintage Ludwig metal snares. As most of you know, one snare drum is never enough. So we've got 3 drums spanning Ludwig's 1970s product range for your viewing and listening pleasure. We've got the student model Acrolite, the mid-level Ludwig Standard, and the high-end, one and only, often imitated, never duplicated LM400 Supraphonic. Now, despite some very obvious hardware differences between these 3, they also have a few important things in common besides being Ludwigs from the 1970s. All 3 drums are 5 by 14 inches in size, and they all feature seamless aluminum shells crafted in Ludwig's Damon Avenue factory in Chicago, Illinois. Now, as you know, vintage snare drums can sometimes be pretty pricey. However, all of these drums can readily be had for under $350, and in some cases under $200 if you're lucky. There's dozens of these things on Reverb.com right now. So what we've done is outfitted all 3 with coated Evans G1 batters, clear snare side 300s, and 20-strand pure sound strainers. Let's take a look at the features on each drum and then compare how they sound. The Superphonic was first released in 1955 with brass shell construction under the name Super Ludwig. In the 1960s, they switched to cheaper aluminum shell construction and renamed it the Supraphonic. Now, this particular drum dates from the mid-1970s and is the LM400 model. It's got a pointed blue and olive badge, it's got a 2-hole black-face P85 snare strainer, large knob muffler, and of course, as all Ludwig Supraphonics have, it's got that iconic chrome over aluminum center bead shell with 10 notched imperial lugs. Due in large part to its extensive use by Hal Blaine of the Wrecking Crew, this drum is known as the most recorded snare drum in history. Whether or not that's actually true is definitely up for debate, but you can't deny that the sound of this drum has been heard on thousands upon thousands of hit recordings over the past 50+ years. This drum has a bright, slightly hollow sound with a sweetness that makes it respond really well to rim shots. The center bead in the shell actually breaks up the overtones a little bit and means that the snares are allowed to vibrate, gives you a little more sensitivity, responds very well at almost any dynamic level. This is still a top choice for many session players and live musicians these days, and a favorite of many studio engineers because it's so easy to record. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the Acrolite, or Acro as it's sometimes known. Although this drum was marketed as a student model, aside from some hardware differences, it features the exact same beaded seamless aluminum shell as its more expensive brother, the Superphonic. Introduced around 1963, the Acrolite originally sported a brushed aluminum finish with a keystone badge and the baseball bat muffler. This version here is from 1971, and so it features a painted gray finish. It's got the small knob muffler and the iconic pointed blue and olive badge, of course, as well as a 12-hole blackface P85 snare strainer, for those of you who care. Although the Acrolite never really gained the notoriety and widespread popularity of the Superphonic, this drum remains a secret weapon for a lot of top session players and gigging pros. It's got a dry, focused, and slightly hollow sound like the Superphonic, however, it lacks a bit of that high-end sparkle and sweetness. This drum responds really well with a little bit of muffling and retains sensitivity at just about any dynamic level, much like the Superphonic does. Now last but certainly not least, we have the Standard Series metal shell snare drum. This one is sort of the red-headed stepchild of the bunch. The Standard Series was launched in 1968 as a way for Ludwig to compete with the influx of low-priced Japanese kits that were flooding the market. Now the wood drums in the Standard Series actually featured the same iconic 3-ply shell construction as their high-end drums at the time, with lighter hardware and some funky 70s looking finishes. Despite the high-quality construction, the line didn't last very long, and by around 1973, they had been removed from Ludwig's product lineup. The metal shell drum seen here sports a very similar shell construction to the Superphonic and the Acrolite. It's got a thin aluminum shell, but you can see there's no center bead on this drum. It was available in chrome over aluminum finish or in the matte gray Acrolite finish, as it was called in the catalog, confusingly, which you see here. This drum has 8 standard lugs. It's got the classic Ludwig P83 strainer and small knob tone control muffler, as well as the rounded triangle Ludwig standard badge. Now, being an 8-lugger with a painted aluminum shell, much like the Acrolite, these two sound pretty similar. However, this drum has a slightly more focused attack, and to my ear has some really, really nice warm tones, especially when played with rim shots. This is definitely a sleeper, and it's a great vintage snare drum for the player on a budget. So there you have it, 3 drums from the golden age of American drum manufacturing, all of which offer that classic Ludwig metal shell snare sound to fit any budget. There are literally dozens of these 3 drums on Reverb.com right now, not to mention tons of aftermarket hardware part options from Ludwig and third-party manufacturers that would fit any of these 3 drums. Go check them out.